So here they're older, they're moving into retirement, they're sick and they're in the hospital, and now their identity is being stripped a little bit. So a lot of times we have to engage them as if they're still relative, which we know they are. But sometimes when the older individual becomes the patient, we think that they're not still engaged or relevant in how we treat them.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we are exploring how generational characteristics influence patient care in the surgical setting with Vangie Dennis. And we're really going to look at how we can tailor our approach based on where our patient may fall on the generational spectrum. Whether we're talking about traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, there is a lot of difference in our patient population, but we can also learn about it and make sure that we are providing effective care every time we interact with a patient. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Vangie Dennis.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Vangie Dennis. Vangie is a perioperative consultant, a laser safety expert, a smoke evacuation advocate from South Carolina and Georgia. We'll claim both of those states. And Vangie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're very welcome, Melanie. It's an honor and pleasure to be able to discuss an important topic that sometimes in the midst of DEI and diversity that a lot of times we ignore. And not only does it affect our workforce, but it affects our patients.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I reached out to you as we were planning this season, because I've heard you speak on generational differences in the workforce before, and I've always enjoyed your presentations because I always walk away with something new about I'm in the Gen X kind of millennial. I don't know where you really fit me, but learning more about how to interact with people that are older than me, the new generation coming into the workforce. And so, but when we turn that on its head and think, okay, our patients are part of these generations too. And how do we interact with them and help them navigate the perioperative experience? I'm like, oh, Vangie can talk about this. I want to talk to Vangie. So before we jump into that topic though, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone so they can get a good idea of who you are?
Thank you so much. Well, obviously, as Melanie said, I'm a perioperative nurse for I say this with great respect, over 40-something years, where I started in intensive care and, of course, moved into perioperative services, which is the majority of my career. I was a coordinator. I was a staff nurse. I was an educator. Probably 50% of my career in perioperative nursing was in the educational role, and decided to move into management because I felt like leadership helped to move the needle, that I felt like I understood what my team was going through. And you touch many lives instead of just focusing on more singular types of focuses in perioperative nursing. And it's just been a wonderful journey.
And I'm just honored at the privilege that I get to talk to you today, but also that, we talked also in another interview, we actually interviewed Charlie Lynn, and we've talked about the close-knit perioperative community and how we might be all over the country, but we through AORN and through LinkedIn and through these ways to connect, that we can all connect with each other and be able to learn and benefit from everybody else's expertise. And so it really is a privilege to get to pick your brain today and learn from you about this topic. But let's just jump right into it. When we're talking about generational differences, we're talking about the different generations. We hear a lot about this just on social media and other things, but what is it that we're really talking about?
Thanks. I think there's challenges, and we're going to focus more on our patients today, but those challenges are also with the individuals working in our work environment and how they relate to our patients. So it's very different, and it affects, let's face it, our ability to relate effectively. And those traits are our value systems. They're our beliefs, our life experiences, our ethics, our communication, and how we respond to those individuals. So if you want to break it out, we're going to talk about traditionalists, because what's happening in the bell curve of our life expectancy, a lot of our patients are between being baby boomers with a smidgen of us, not us, I want to say not me yet, I hope not, give me some time there, of traditionalists. So that's the majority, but what's coming up the back is the Generation X, and then the younger generation, the millennials, and Generation Z. Never has there been a time in whether it's our patients or our workforces, we had 5 generations together. So traditionalists are those patients born between 1925 and 1945. And boomers were from 1946 to 1964. I just gave away too much information there since I'm a boomer. But traditionalists, back to them, they're respectful. They are authority focused, and they're very loyal individuals. Whereas boomers was the show me generation, strong work ethics, very optimistic and competitive. Now let's get to the Generation X, and that's 1965 to 1980. Those individuals, and these are value systems again. That doesn't mean we're all pigeonholed. They're economically conservative and very resourceful, but they can be skeptical. Whereas millennials from 81 to 2000, techno savvy. I said these individuals can text at the speed of light. Remember, I'm a laser nurse, 186 miles per second. They're realist. And now is coming the Generation Z. They're from 2001 through 2020. So you can see how they're starting to move into the workforce. They're global. They're entrepreneurish. They're progressive. They're less focused on all the little aspects of what impacts them in their life.
And that's a lot of diversity just in the generations that we have of the people that we're working with, and then the patients who are coming through our doors. And so let's back it up. Let's back up to those traditionalists. With being very respectful, that tendency towards extreme loyalty, maybe. Do you find that with this patient population, then they don't ask very many questions, that they will just take what the doctor says and says, well, the doctor said it, so I need to do it? And does that drive the way that they interact with healthcare?
I think you're 100% right. Not that statistically I've been able to validate that, but just in their characteristics, they are private. They're a very silent generation, highly respectful of education. If you think about nurses back then, I was that nurse that would get my seat up when the physician entered the room and carry the charts from patient to patient. So it is that respect. They're hardworking individuals. They trust their docs. Most importantly, to where what the physician says about their care is the word. So I think we have to be very cautious of that when we're caring for their patient. They're also very trustworthy. They're trustworthy to the nurses or to the nursing assistants as well as the physicians, but how we communicate them needs to be very formal. A lot of times, open oral communication. I know when we're doing the surgical assessment with that, you have to be very specific in how you communicate to them because they don't understand all this. So it's got to be very formalized style. And that generation loves organizational structure and rules.
So then let's move up generations then to our baby boomers. Is my assumption correct that this is the largest group of patients that we're seeing in healthcare?
Yes, it is right now because of the age, the life expectancy. We're moving out at a drastic rate in retirement. So a lot of the baby boomers are out there retiring. But that's a huge transition for that generation because even though we're moving into retirement, a lot of times they still want to stay involved. They live to work, they didn't work to live. So it's very hard for those generations to unwind with that. Boomers are very competitive. They're the show me generation. And sometimes you got to, when you're talking to your patient, you're thinking, well, they're egocentric. Are they really? But that's that value system that they've grown up with. And they also strive for possibility and constant change. They started the workaholic trend. So here we've got, they're older, they're moving into retirement, they're sick and they're in the hospital, and now their identity is being stripped a little bit. So a lot of times we have to engage them as if they're still relative, which we know they are. But sometimes when the older individual becomes the patient, we think that they're not still engaged or relevant in how we treat them.
Well, then that makes perfect sense in why patients can sometimes be very offended when we come into the room as the younger nurse, the younger assistant, whoever's coming in the room, and then we interact with maybe their family member or their caregiver, and we don't interact with them, even though they are perfectly capable of communicating and talking to us. And maybe because, they're the patient on the stretcher, or we see them as older, or whatever reasons we may have or biases we might bring into that, we forget and we talk to the person next to them instead of actually talking to them. And that can be a problem.
That does tend to happen. There's a wide range of individuals, and the majority tail end of boomers are moving into retirement, but they still are working. Are they in retirement, or are they they're still working? I think too, one thing about baby boomers, they came into the anti-rule and regulations. So they don't appreciate rules for the sake of having rules. So when we communicate with the boomers, we have to be very explicit in that communication process, because they don't take a fluff on it. Oh, you'll be okay. It's fine. Give them the reasons and the why behind it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They do. They fight for a cause. They don't like problems, but if you give them a cause, they will fight for it.
Yeah. And why is so important? I think all of us want to know why, but you can really see how important it is to this particular generation. I do think that there's still a carryover from the traditionalists, that there is that respect for authority when it comes to the doctor and their decisions, unlike what we might look at later with like Gen Z and looking everything up online. But when it comes to our baby boomers, they are going to be more accepting of diagnoses and things, but they want to know why, or why are we asking you to do this? Why is your care involving this, or your post-op instructions? And so remembering to give those answers is a great way to really get their buy-in so that they can have a good outcome.
Yeah, there is supported behaviors and tips for communicating with our baby boomer patients. We have to understand that our body language is going to display a lot of what we're saying. I mean, I always say, don't look behind your eyeballs. So they know when you're really telling the truth. They read your body language. You have to speak in an open and direct style, but not in a controlling language. And they will be expected to press for the details here. And they want to see options in how we demonstrate our flexibility with thinking and how we can answer them.
So here's one more question about baby boomers that I think is important for us to really address, but keep in mind as we are caring for people in this generation. A lot of baby boomers, when they do have surgery, when they come into the hospital, anytime they're interacting with healthcare and that they're going to be in a hospital bed or they're going to have surgery, something's going to happen, there is that fear of dependence or that fear of loss of independence after surgery. So how can we best address that fear so that our patients can feel seen, feel heard, and really have their questions answered so they can get back to their lives after they have surgery?
Well, I think back to what we just said. You have to be open-minded and make sure that communication process and let them be part of the decision in their care, which we should do that with all our patients, but more so the boomers at this point. I can remember passing judgment one time, and I'm not going to give you the names. I always say I change the names to protect the innocent. When I was speaking to a woman that was a baby boomer, she had an invasive cancer, but she chose not to have her mastectomy. And I just couldn't believe it, at this point. And I'm a boomer. But I remember speaking to a very wise physician, and he said, well, we're putting our value systems on that patient. Maybe with their culture, maybe with where they're at in their life, maybe the body is more important than the aspects of what will occur if that disease process. But I began to pass judgment on that. And why aren't they doing that? When indeed, that's very typical of a boomer. They want control of their physical health.
That is a really good takeaway. Just thinking about putting our value systems onto the patient instead of respecting and recognizing the value systems that our patients are bringing into their care. Just that little nugget can be applied no matter what generation we're talking about. And so as we move on to Gen X, this independent but skeptical but very resourceful generation, right? It's different than the two other generations we've talked about before. And we're a big generation. I fall at the very end of that Gen X generation, but I still fall into it. And so I know that I see a lot of myself in a lot of the characteristics we talk about. But what do we need to know when we're caring for these patients?
Well, you're a great example, Melanie. They are entrepreneurish in spirit. They love investing in their own development versus, and not meaning negative, than an organization. And sometimes people see them as disloyal, but they're cautious in their relationships and their choices in life. Some may say that, well, they're not very reliable or very cavalier, but they're not. They're very focused on trying to look at it from a different perspective than just jumping right in. They're loyal, but it's got to match their value systems in life. They're independent. They're very creative. They have goals and prefer to manage their own time and solve their own problems. So here's this patient that wants to be very much a part of that in their goal of getting well or wellness. Information, they love information. So they would do very well with preoperative assessment, whether it's telemedicine or going to a computer. We're seeing a lot of AI move into that. But they love the access to information. And the more we give them, the more they're going to take that in. They need feedback. So if you're in there with that patient and we're talking about their care and progression to wellness there, they want to be heard, but they also want feedback to adapt to those new situations. This generation is very flexible, very open-minded when it comes to that, more so than the previous generations that we talked about. Real important for them to get back into balancing their life and their responsibility.
And that's actually the next thing that I was going to bring up, because when we have our Gen X patients, a lot of times what our patients might be balancing outside of the hospital is that statistics have shown, a lot of our Gen Xers are balancing both having their own children and also caring for aging parents. And so they have a lot of concerns, a lot of worries, a lot of things spinning. And so they don't maybe have the patience for inefficiency, for long waits. They want that information and they want to have it. And it's not out of, I think, a place of, like you said, just being cavalier, rude, whatever, but they have a lot going on and they want the information, they crave it, but it needs to be delivered. Don't waste my time. I don't want my time wasted.
You know what? You're right. They are the sandwich generation more so than others. They love communication tools and they like short bites. Don't go into a dissertation when you're talking to them. They're off somewhere else when you're trying to provide care. They like it in short bites. They want information shared. They don't want you to just spit it out. They want you to come back and follow up. But their communication style is informal. So you may see not quite like what you see with the traditionalists or the boomers. They're less formal for sure.
Absolutely. The other thing that we have to remember with our Gen X patients is these patients primarily are still in the workforce as well. They've got children that are coming up or grown or in college. They've got parents that they might also be caring for as well. And, aging parents bring a whole host of worries, but then they're also still employed. They're still trying to work and manage their jobs. And so how do we help them with maybe expectations of recovery or acknowledging the stressors that they might have as they're trying to take care of their own health with all of the other things they have going on? How do we best, like when we talked about already, like short information, short bites, but what other ways can we help them navigate the healthcare when they are the ones moving through it?
I think they're very positive. This is probably the most positive of all groups. So positive reinforcement on the things that they're going to do exceptionally well. And it's not going to be a perfect world when we're in the hospital or something occurs. We have to include them. They want input. They want to attempt some independence themselves and actually provide recommendations for their care. They're very positive, and they grew up in very tranquil times. And as a result, they're very optimistic outlook on life in general. So they want to hear the good, not how you're never going to walk again, you're missing your left leg. That's ugly to say right now. But they want to hear the positive aspects of their care.
This is just like, ringing a bell just with me, because this is my generation, and I can be, yes, this is what I want to hear. This is how I want to be treated, right? If I was the patient. So if we move a generation up, and now we're talking about millennials, that 1981 to 2000, very tech savvy, very accustomed to instant access. And so that changes yet again how we interact with our patients, and also might even change as we look at our nursing workforce, as we look at our workforce is older. A lot of us are older. Our Gen Xers, our baby boomers are the ones providing the care. And then suddenly going back to maybe putting our value systems on our patients, we might not know or understand how to interact with these patients who are very tech savvy and different than the nurse who's coming in the room to care for them. So it definitely changes a lot of the dynamics.
Yes. Just like Generation X, millennials want more input in helping to guide them to their own independence. They are also very positive individuals. They grew up with more diversity. You don't have to talk DEI to them. They are very diverse. They use money as a means of having fun in life. And like I said earlier, just like the extras, technology is very valued, and it's a tool. So we can use that in their care using technology. You know what? Yes, I'm a boomer, but I love my chart. I don't want to get on the phone with anybody.
I don't either.
Millennials, I just want to click, 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 click.
Yep.
I think that's a little bit of all this after teaching it and being in the workforce so long. But when you communicate to them, you use action words and you challenge them to move to wellness there. And I'll tell you, this group will resent you more so than any of the other groups if you talk down to them. They love, like you said, my chart or the email communication. And they love humor in creating a fun environment when you're trying to say, well, you're going to do great. You'll be roller skating, or what was the infamous joke that everybody said? You'll be playing the piano. And the guy goes, well, I've never played the piano before. But they love not taking things so seriously. And they will take a little more risk in being part of their care, even though they may not be experts in it.
And is there not also a kind of going back to what you said about, they are taking control of their care. They are more patient-centered they want to be patient-centered in their decision-making. So they want to have a large say in that. And which can sometimes then lead to kind of like, other patients deciding they don't want something or they don't want that, or they might be motivated to go seek out multiple opinions or other second opinions, third opinions, whatever, before they finally decide to have something done. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are those patients that the physician says, please don't Google your diagnosis. Yeah. They get in there and they look for everything. Yeah. Where the information may not be always correct. So you've got to tell them, please don't do that. That's how because they love technology. So they're Googling MD. What is the name of that website?
WebMD. Yeah.
WebMD. I'm even doing that for my dog. So
Well, if you think, okay, so actually one time I had something going on. I don't even remember what it was, but I, Googled it because that's what we do. And a WebMD comes up and I'm reading about it, and WebMD's telling me I could have testicular cancer. And I'm like, WebMD, I don't think that testicular cancer is a choice for me personally based on my symptoms. But, so just a stupid example of that. Maybe we don't need to trust everything that WebMD diagnoses us with, but we're all guilty. We all do it.
Yep, we are. I think what's happened, because we put so much focus now on the different generations, and we're Like I said earlier, when we first started talking, never have I seen 5 generations in the workforce. So now we're taking a little bit of each other's value system. I would never text with 2 thumbs 5 years ago with both my thumbs. I did it with one finger. Now I'm using both thumbs when I text. And
Right.
that's taking it from that generation, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great example. I remember you talking about that when you talked about this at the Georgia State Council conference when we had that one a couple of years ago, and you were talking about 2-thumb texting. As I was sitting there 2-thumb texting somebody else, and I had to laugh because I had only picked that up myself a little while before because honestly, my kids made fun of me, and I'm like, okay, fine, I can be like the cool kids and I can text like you guys do.
Oh, absolutely. If you're going to work with these patients, or you're going to have people like that in the workforce, you got to take a little bit of their value systems and integrate them within yourself. These individuals were shaped very much after 9/11, and the access to technology was so important, and they got it at a very young age. My son, for example, at 3 years old, could work an audio system in my house. I'm going, oh, please don't touch it, please, because I was afraid of that. But they were very focused on that. And they are motivated by diversity and personalization and creativity. We actually did texting, last place I worked, with a lot of different families. What we gave them the option with a QR code to text the transition of their loved one through the perioperative cycle. And you'd be surprised, a lot of them signed up for it. So they love it.
Yeah. I am one of those who would gladly take a text. And again, it's kind of, I don't know, symptomatic of my generation, but I'd rather have a text than call me. Please don't call me. Let's text. But so I can see why people would like that. And also I think it's that belief that because it's a text, I'm more likely to get communicated with than maybe waiting on a phone call if they don't know where I am or whatever. And we all have our phones with us all the time. So definitely, I think a lot of confidence in those texts when it comes, but also it's about the communication, right? And we want to have the information. We want to be communicated with. And I can see how that feeds into that, but it's a positive. It's a good thing. All right. So we're coming to the end, but we're going to hit Gen Z before we get done with this conversation, because this is the newest generation that we're seeing in the workforce, but also, we're going to see patients of this generation as well. So, and it's one that I don't know the most about, even though my kids fall into this generation. So I see them as my children, which is sad. But anyway, so what do we need to know about Gen Z?
Well, they too are after the 9/11, and communication style is transitioned from the other generation, where they're texting, social media, the TikTok, the Instagram that I'm just getting into. And here is my son-in-law, who's a plastic surgeon, all on Instagram. They are digital device addicts, is what they are. A worldview is self-identifying that way, but that's how we would communicate with them as patients. They love the technology, and we gave the example of my chart. They're quick to embrace that. They don't want to go into the office. Telemedicine works very well for these types of patients in that transition. And the other thing about these guys, they may sound like they're not paying attention to them, but they can multitask. So they're doing one thing, but they're really hearing you. Surprisingly enough, they can schedule multiple conversations and be talking to their boyfriend or their girlfriend or whatever friend zone they're in, and talking very much to their nurse simultaneously. It's not being rude. They are authentic, but they expect that authenticity to be the same with their care. They're very much emphasize practicality, and they're the big users of the Instagram.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. So what about, though, we think about this is a younger generation. These are people who might not have interacted as much with the healthcare system. Maybe they've not had surgery before. How do we appropriately, adequately maybe address fears and anxieties that this patient population might have when they are in the perioperative setting?
I think in the perioperative setting, of course, they don't want it to be fluffed up. We have to personalize it as much as we can and give examples. And then there are also ones that you want to emphasize, don't get on the Google search about your diagnosis, and make them get involved with their care. That's real important. And emphasizing practicality of why we're focusing on that care to help them get back to what they love doing.
Right. Absolutely. Giving them the focus of beyond this of recovery and giving the information that they desperately want so that they know how to, how to interact, how to get better, all of the things. So much of, I think of this because this is my kids. This is, my children all fall into this, and they haven't had a lot of, they've gone to the doctor, they go for their checkups and they do whatever, but having to have surgery is a big thing, and it's terrifying. And even my kids were like Googling what was going to happen after, they had their wisdom teeth taken out, or because of Instagram and because of TikTok, they were expecting after their wisdom teeth, this is just a good example, but after their wisdom teeth were removed, they were expecting that they were going to be stupid silly afterwards, because there's so many reels out there of people being dumb after their procedures because they've still got anesthesia on board and they're, silly. So then when I pick them up from this procedure, they want my phone ready so that I can record however they might act so they can see it. And I'm like, guys, the reels that you see aren't necessarily reality. But I think that connects to our patients in a way because they have been fed a diet of Instagram reels or TikTok or whatever. And so they expect things about surgery or about healthcare because they've seen them in reels that may or may not be reality, and helping them navigate that and understand what's really going to happen is really important.
Absolutely. I think communication tips are important regardless of our generations, because other things that integrate with it is our gender issues. Even again, with the people that are in the workforce responding, what is the stress level or the background of what's going on, whether they're 20 years old or 50 years old, what's going on in their life there. And we did this when I was at Emory. It's our communication tips to our patients. We call that our paralanguage. I'm going to give you an example. We had a body language person come in and we let them present at AORN. We used Emory as an example. And she just watched. She watched them move a patient from the stretcher to the wheelchair, and the patient was a patient of size, and they were grunting and making and I'm going, oh my goodness, guys, are you listening to yourself? That's their paralanguage or their facial expressions. You can even tell it behind the mask. You know that, Melanie, when the eyes.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we have to lighten up our face. It doesn't matter how we feel, it's how we project to our patients.
Right.
And our body language is imperative to the care of all 5 generations.
Absolutely. And that is a great way to bring this conversation to a close, remembering how we interact, how our body language is interpreted by our patients, and how we can learn more so that we can approach them in a way that's going to be best for them. Because ultimately it's all about them. I can put myself aside and I need to be there for them. So Vangie, thank you so much for sharing just a little bit of this topic with us today. I'm really thankful that you took the time to do it.
Oh, you're welcome. Like I said, it was an honor to share it and look at it from this perspective. We tend to look at it in the workforce, but why are we in business? We're in business to take care of patients.
Absolutely. All right, Vangie, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Melanie.
That was Vangie Dennis. She is a perioperative consultant, a laser safety expert. She's a smoke evacuation advocate, and she is just a really good person to sit and learn from when we're talking about the generations, whether we're talking about working with the multiple generations in the workforce or flipping the script like we did today and looking at our patients from that perspective. And I think a really good takeaway is to remember that instead of putting our value system onto the patient, letting the patient dictate as much as they can, and their decisions are important based on their value system and what they decide and how they choose to interact with the healthcare system. And remembering that the little bitty minute differences, maybe some very big differences between our patient populations, but keeping our body language in check and just seeing the patient for who they are can make a world of difference when our patients are in a very vulnerable state and they are depending on us to really ensure that they have a great experience. That is going to do it for this week's episode. On behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to this episode of First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.